Welcome to Baptist Press This Week, sponsored by the College at Southeastern. I'm Brandon Porter. In this episode of Baptist Press This Week, we welcome in Southern Baptist President Bart Barber. He's up for re-election this year at the annual meeting in New Orleans. In just a moment, we're going to hear from Bart Barber on issues that are on the forefront of many Southern Baptist minds. Well, President Barber, thanks so much for joining us for Baptist Press This Week.
It's great to be here. Thank you, Brandon, for the invitation.
Yeah, you've been serving as the SBC president for almost a year. You've had a busy year. What's kept you busy in this past year?
Oh, gosh, the things that probably people would expect and maybe some things people wouldn't expect. Whenever you have disasters, that's the sort of thing that I've tried to connect with people. Want to try to connect with, the Southern Baptist Convention is just a meeting that happens 2 days every year. That's the formal legal definition of who we are, constitutional definition of who we are. But we feel like a family, don't we? And so this family of churches, part of what you do is wind up trying to connect with them. So I've been to the National African American Fellowship Board meeting, and I've been to all 6 seminaries to preach and to interact with those students. And I've been to a lot of local association meetings. I dedicated a new building for the North Arkansas Baptist Association just a month ago. And I've been to some state conventions. And so you stay busy just trying to knit those connective threads that keep us all as Southern Baptists feeling like we belong with one another. And then on top of that, I think we all know that that our convention is trying to work through some issues. One of the things that we face right now is the response to clergy sex abuse and data that we've learned about that. And so I've also been involved in some of the litigation that we've had as Southern Baptists and given a deposition or two. And so all of those things are things. When you add in having a couple of teenagers in the house, that really add up to not being someone sitting on a whole lot of free time.
Mm-hmm. As you think about that, as we come into this annual meeting in New Orleans and you look forward, what would be something that you would want to address, or what are things that you'd want to address in a second term?
So I can say that a lot of them are just a matter of trying to carry all the way through to completion some of the things that we've been working with this year. I think the sex abuse response is something that actually the task force is making some announcements about what they're doing. They're moving forward in a way that doesn't use faith-based solutions, guidepost solutions. They're moving forward in a way that implements a ministry check website with the first 3 parts of the credibly accused standard that the messengers had adopted last year. There's work left to be done in all of those areas to fine tune and try to carry the ball forward further. And obviously, we also have a pending Department of Justice investigation that's ongoing. I believe that the Southern Baptist Convention is going to be able to move through lawsuits and investigations, is going to be able to move through these processes of deciding what to do with sexual abuse in a way that preserves the autonomy of our churches, preserves the non-connectional nature of all of our entities, does not leave anybody's church taking on responsibility for somebody else's church's misdeeds, and is able to safeguard the legal interests of the Southern Baptist Convention while working to prevent abuse and to act justly toward people who have perpetrated abuse, who need to meet with justice, and people who have suffered abuse, who need to receive justice for those things. And so we're working toward all of those things. I think there's more work left to do. I want to carry that forward. We've also had a year where we've had a lot of conversation about the office of pastor and the role of women in the Southern Baptist Convention. I think Southern Baptists are united around the idea of affirming that God uses and calls women to do amazing things in our churches and in our own lives. We are, after all, a body of believers who, unlike our Catholic friends, we believe that men and women are priests, that all believers are priests. It's a priesthood that extends to everyone. We're congregationally governed in our churches, and so women are involved in decision making. But we do limit the office of pastor to men. It's an office in which, in the vast preponderance of our churches, women vote to select who it is who's going to be in that office as a man, occupying the office of pastor. And so we're in a position where we found ourselves having a big conversation about that over the course of this year. I think we can look and see that we have some structural challenges that come from the way Article 3 of our Constitution defines what it means to have a faith and practice that fits within the SBC, ties that to the Baptist faith and message in some way or another. And then also we have bylaw 8 of our bylaws that puts in place a standing credentials committee who has no choice but to come up with rulings about how Article 3 applies to churches. And I think that we have conflict because we're sinners. But I also think that structure and governing documents can make conflict happen less by providing a great, stable structure that helps us to avoid conflict or resolve conflict, or it can make conflict happen more because it creates a lack of clarity and uncertainty, and it pushes us into positions where just because we have convictions about things, that we wind up really wrestling over things. And I worry that as we're really having some of our earliest opportunities to actually implement Article 3 and Bylaw 8, that we're seeing that this may be something that causes us to have more conflict rather than causing us to have less conflict. And so I hope that I can lead us over the course of a second year to try to answer a lot of these questions with clarity and consistency, so that we're not all uncertain and we're not all up in the air, but so that everybody can know, here's what churches believe if they cooperate in the Southern Baptist Convention. Here are what the boundaries are. And to do that in a way where we're not trapped in a cycle of litigating doctrine after doctrine, year after year, in that sort of 1 inch at a time, soul-sucking way that makes nobody want to come to our annual meetings. I'd like for us to try to resolve some of those things and get a structure in place that gives us clarity and consistency, so that we can come to our meetings and focus on our mission and celebrate what we're doing through NAM and IMB and the seminaries and the ERLC and Guidestone and the the Lifeway and all of the things that are happening in Southern Baptist life. They're so amazing. If we could just settle these doctrinal things and know where the boundaries are, we can focus on those things instead. So I'd like to try to help lead us in the second year to get to a healthy place on that, where we can resolve those issues and move forward.
What does that structure look like? If you could, I know that you may not know the specifics to the detail, but in a broad sense, because we're living in a time when people don't know what the definition of a male or a female is. And so, at a time when we have to really define terms. Sure. And so it's hard to be broad and specific both at the same time, if you will, as we think about that.
I think we have a lot of options, and I think there would be a need to study those options. I'll throw out some options that could help with that. We could do, like a lot of groups, when Southern Baptists form networks other than the Southern Baptist Convention, you see things like Acts 29 or Pillar or 9 Marks or whatever else. What they all do is just say, here's our statement of faith, and you have to agree with all of it. Okay. So I think that option may not work well for Southern Baptists, but there's one option. Another option would be to say, what we've got now is, here's our statement of faith, and you have to agree with it to some unspecified degree. And then also, here's a list of things that we'll kick you out for. Okay. I think another option would be to say, here's our statement of faith. You need to agree with all of it except, and put a list of exceptions. Say, we're not going to kick you out if you police the Lord's table, if you fence it differently than another church does or whatever. and to just come to some of those things that we've looked at and said, we want to say something about that. We want to say what we believe about that, but we don't want to expel churches over that.
Okay.
Another possibility would be to say, you know what? All this worked well until we had a standing credentials committee. Can we find another way to do what we were trying to do with the standing credentials committee and not have that going forward and return to the way things worked before we had bylaw 8 that way, and just find some mechanism where we were trying to solve a problem, where we put that in place? Is there another way to solve that problem that doesn't cause us, that just returns to the messenger body? What does closely identifies with? It means whatever 50% plus one of the ballots say at any particular annual meeting. And so I think there are really a lot of different ways that we could do this. I just think that right now, one way I've described it is, I think the intersection of Article 3 and Bylaw 8 right now is a 6-lane highway intersection with no stop signs or stoplights. And I think that's a place where you're going to have collision after collision. And I think the only way an intersection like that works is if everybody knows what the rules are. And so I hope that we can, and if everybody knew what the rules were, we wouldn't have the back and forth we have this year coming into our annual meeting. So I would really love to have another year to work on trying to help us clarify what the rules are in a way where we can avoid those collisions.
Okay. One of the issues you mentioned was about sexual abuse and the work of the ARITF. If I can just ask you about that, a couple of questions on that. First, what are some things that the ARITF has done well this year?
I think the best thing that they've done is they've listened to people. One of the things that I've been explaining is people come to me and said, I'm worried that this task force maybe, what happens if they become radicalized? And if they're really trying to push some dangerous agenda and undo local church autonomy and make my church responsible for what another church did financially or whatever else. And I've heard people say that, and I've said, okay, if the task force were radicalized like that, and if they had some plan to destroy local church autonomy and create ascending liability and let people be falsely accused and have their ministry ruined or whatever, why haven't they already done that? Why didn't they do that in September or October, right after they were appointed? Because they're not waiting on a vote. The messengers already voted to authorize them to hire whoever they wanted and put up a ministry check website with all 4 parts of the messenger approved criterion for what it means to be credibly accused. You have to find some way to explain the slow movement of the ARITF. And really, there's only one explanation for that makes sense, and it's that they're not radicalized. It's that instead, the implementation task force understands that the real implementation task force is your local church. And they know that the only way this is going to work is if they find a plan that is broadly unifying for Southern Baptists, that we can all get behind, that listens to everybody's concerns and tries to find solutions and reassurances for everybody's concerns. And they've done that amazingly well. At times when they could have thrown their messenger granted authority around, they had money, the sin relief funds they barely spent that they could throw behind whatever they wanted to do. At times when they could have done that, instead, they've stopped and listened to Southern Baptists who disagreed with them about things. They've stopped and listened. And as a result, you have their recent announcement that they're going in a direction that does not use faith-based solutions or guidepost solutions, and that they're implementing a ministry check website that only uses the first 3 criteria of the credibly accused definition. And they're not abandoning the 4th criterion. They're just recognizing that they've not yet found any way to implement that builds unity in the Southern Baptist Convention behind that, And they don't want somebody falsely accused to wind up the moment that they do, the moment that you look at somebody and say, look, here are 3 people who are falsely accused, they've been vindicated and they're on this website, that damages the credibility of the whole project. And they don't want to do that. They don't want to undo the work that they're doing. And so they've thought very carefully, they've listened to everybody's concerns, they're committed to Baptist polity. I hear people say, well, they don't care about local church autonomy. They're going to destroy local church autonomy. Probably 1 out of every 5 Southern Baptists learned what local church autonomy was in Gregory Will's classroom at Southern Seminary. He's on the task force. He teaches what local church autonomy is. And so there are Southern Baptists like you and me who are not radicalized, who are listening to everyone and are working so hard to unite us all behind an approach to sexual abuse that helps our churches prevent abuse and take care of those who've been abused.
Yeah. Speaking of preventing abuse, what work do you see out in the future? So that's a little bit of reflection on the back, from last year to this year. As we look forward, what are other things that need to be accomplished to prevent it in Southern Baptist churches?
We're working on the ministry toolbox, but I'll tell you one thing that's happening that's, I think, going to wind up being the most important thing of all as it's unfolding. In some ways, the national task force has been a little bit of a lightning rod for controversy. And while that's happened to them, state conventions have groups in place that are working quietly that have done amazing work in trying to help our churches be equipped well to prevent abuse. And so what needs to happen is, I think the national task force is in a great place to put together like the toolbox and the Ministry Check website, and to provide some resources that can be handed down to state conventions and local associations who are themselves autonomous. They can address this any way that makes sense to them. And it's the genius of our system that you have state conventions that are experimenting with this. You have local associations who are experimenting with what to do. And so the way this goes forward is that all of those groups, this permeates down into local associations close to the local churches, figuring out what works. And then it also percolates up as we look and say, here's a neighboring state that's got something that's working so well. We're going to adopt that in our state as well. And pretty soon it becomes something that the whole nation's looking at. So I think this process moves forward in that way. It's not just about 9 people sitting at the top of some pyramid in robes, bringing their gavel down and saying, thus we decree, here's the way Southern Baptists are going to fix this problem. What's happening is that all hands are on deck at all levels, and there's a lot of creative and amazing work going on to solve these problems. And we're just going to take note of what everybody's doing. We're going to find the best solutions, and they'll succeed on their own merits. Those solutions will, and will make their way across the whole convention, I think.
So here at the College of Southeastern, we are equipping students to give their lives for the cause of Christ in the church, among the nations, and in every aspect of society. So the College of Southeastern is not just a Bible college. While the Bible is the foundation for all of our degrees and even all of our courses, we're going to equip students in a variety of fields so that they can give their lives for the cause of Christ in any number of different ways.
In the context that we have here, the kind of education that we have here is not a choosing between a really good education versus a Christian education. I think the best education possible is one that holds Christ at the center, who is the truth and the way and the life.
I would stack our graduates up against any university graduates. They really receive a well-rounded education, a tough education, but at the same time, really being filled up with learning to live out the gospel.
Truly, everything we do is to equip students to give their lives for Christ's cause, in the church, among the nations, in every aspect of society. When you leave this place, you really do look more like Jesus. If you want your life to be that, then you need to be here.
The role of women in pastoral ministry. I'd like to touch on that for a minute. Obviously, that there's a lot of discussion, not only about women who are preaching or women who are, in a lead pastor role, but women as pastors in a broad sense as well. What are your thoughts on that issue?
Well, I'll tell you, here at FBC Farmersville, we don't call somebody a pastor unless they're also an elder and overseer. All of those folks are men. When we say that somebody's a pastor, like I had lunch earlier with my student pastor across the table from me. When we say student, we're talking about a job assignment that he has to work with students. When we say pastor, he's not just the pastor of teenagers. He's a pastor for everybody in our church. That's a church-wide. He visits in the hospital, everybody in our church. He has leadership functions that pertain to the entirety of the church. And so, for our congregation, and I think Southern Baptists largely agree that whatever a pastor is, the office of pastor is something that men are able to be in, that it's limited to men who are qualified by Scripture. That's what the Baptist Faith and Message says. It's what Southern Baptists believe. The fact is, we've come to a point in kind of Baptist experimentation with ecclesiology where it's not just women. There are a lot of men who are in churches who occupy a staff position where they have the title pastor, where that church does not regard them as an elder and overseer. Mm-hmm. And Baptists have for 400 years believed that those three words go together. And so there are also some women who occupy a role where they're called children's pastor, or they're called a preteen pastor, or they're called a women's pastor, or something like that. It's not an office that pertains to the whole church. They're not an elder. They're not an overseer. They're not preaching. They're not. So there are some places where a guy like me, who's very strict about the application of the word pastor, would look at a church and say, I think that you've wandered away from Scripture in what this person is called and in what this person is doing. And I think that's a pretty serious situation. I think there are also times where we come and say, I think you've wandered away from the Bible and what this person is called, but I don't think you need to change anything about what this person is doing. I think you're just misapplying a label that should be reserved for this church office that the Baptist Faith and Message talks about, and you've applied it to someone who's not in that office. I think that when you look at a situation like Saddleback, they're going to get a fair process in their appeal to Southern Baptist Convention. But everybody knows that everybody who's listened or paid attention knows that my position on that is that they've moved outside who we are as Southern Baptists. And I agree with the executive committee's decision to disfellowship Saddleback. Their recent decision to install as a campus pastor one of the women that they had initially ordained as a youth pastor, that crossed an additional line, I think, for a lot of Southern Baptists when they saw that happen. And I'm not happy or don't rejoice about losing anybody, but I do think that that's just acknowledging a reality that Saddleback's in a different position than Southern Baptists are, and they're moving in a different trajectory than Southern Baptists are. But I think there are some other occasions where what I'd like to do is persuade rather than expel. And I would love for us to see Southern Baptists come to a point where we're much more thoughtful about the way that we use biblical titles to refer to people who occupy staff positions in our churches. And so I support all the decisions that the executive committee has made, all those decisions over the course of this spring for disfellowshipping. I do think there are some areas where we need to come and reason with one another rather than just expel folks.
Well, what does that look like? What's the role? What's the method of the convention helping a local church rethink those titles?
I'm not only the president of the convention, I'm also the pastor of a local church and a friend of people. And so I think there are a lot of ways that Southern Baptist life touches on these things. It has to do with the way we teach in our seminaries. about what those offices are. I taught Baptist Heritage at Southwestern Seminary as an adjunct professor for several years. And I always taught about pastor and elder and overseer being the same things. And that's what this word means. And it's limited to men, it's qualified by Scripture. And so part of the way that that's accomplished is just by the training that we give to people who are coming through seminary. I think it also sometimes just means a friend talking to a friend and say, this is what I would say to a church that has someone who is serving as a children's pastor, whether they're male or female, serving as children's pastor, that really they would look and say, this somebody is a different kind of thing than who our senior pastor is. If the senior pastor retired, we wouldn't consider promoting this person up into that role because we think they're just a different kind of thing. I would say to them, look, I don't have any authority to tell your church what to do with titles, but what you're doing with that title confuses a lot of other churches about what you believe about the office of pastor. I would encourage you to think about that and to also ask if you're confusing all those local churches, is there a chance that maybe you're also confusing your own church members? Or your community that's watching. And so I would just appeal as a brother to other brothers and sisters to say, we need to realize that the terminology that we use and the words that we use, they tend to shape reality in the future. And so I think just as peers and friends to one another, we can make that appeal. And then I think it's also the convention has spoken to this in the Baptist Faith and Message. And I think that not only has a juridical sort of force to it, I think the strongest way that the Baptist Faith and Message has worked down through the years is just by matter of education and persuasion. Just that people will look and say, wow, the convention said that they believe this. This is a point of view that's serious, that should be considered and taken into account.
Talk a little bit about the role of the cooperative program at FBC Farmersville, if you would.
Sure, absolutely. The FBC Farmersville gives 10% of our undesignated receipts through the cooperative program. I know I talked to somebody who said, isn't it 12? I want to explain to people why. You may see reporting that says that it's something other than 10. Here's why. Our cooperative program gift in January will be 10% of our undesignated receipts in December. So the month finishes, we calculate all of that, then we write a check in the next month and we send that on. So when we fill out an ACP, it's 12 months of undesignated receipts and it's 12 months of cooperative program giving, but it's a different 12 months that is being calculated based on and all of that. So it's a simple rule here. We finish the month, we add up what we brought in and we divide that by 10, we write a check and we send it to the Southern Baptist of Texas Convention as our cooperative program giving. We absolutely support that 100%. It's amazing what it does. 92 missionaries that are going to be sent in the sending celebration in New Orleans, 10,000 churches that have been planted, and all of those through entities that are accountable to us and to our churches who send messengers and through the trustee structure and everything else. It's an amazing, beautiful thing that we accomplish. And, we do some things that are missions efforts that just FBC Farmersville does. We've got an unreached people group in Senegal. We've been going there for 11 years now, sharing the gospel with Bayak people in the Casamance region, and have a church there that's planted, and we're trying to strengthen it and plant other churches. And we're thrilled about all of that. But we wouldn't have been able to do that if it weren't for CP-funded missionaries who found that people group, knew somebody needed to go there, did some training to help us know how even to get started. They still help us with infrastructure stuff when we're trying to get over there and arrange things to get where we need to go. And on top of all of that, I mean, if we were doing our own thing, if we got mad and left the Southern Baptist Convention and stopped the cooperative program, how long would it take FBC Farmersville to start building something new and get to the point where we had 92 missionaries total? More than my lifetime. Let's say that I found out that 10% of our missionaries I really disagreed with. Okay. Well, that would mean that there's still 83 new missionaries who are just the kind of missionaries that I would send. How long would it take FBC Farmersville to build something that could have 83 missionaries total? More than my lifetime, decades and decades. And yet that's not our total missionary count, 92. That's just the new ones that we're sending right now. So it's amazing what we accomplished through the cooperative program. And I can tell you this, win or lose for me coming up, FBC Farmersville will still be giving 10% of our undesignated receipts through the cooperative program next year and the year after that and the year to follow. We are all in and committed to CP missions.
Yeah. What would you say to churches? You've talked some about coming alongside, talking to other churches at different points. What would you say to churches that and pastors who are frustrated by things that are going on in SBC life right now, and they're redirecting their funds or doing something else with their funds? What would you say to them?
Our churches are autonomous. Nobody who came into the Southern Baptist Convention signed a blood oath that they were stuck here forever. I want everybody who's in the Southern Baptist Convention cooperating to be here because they want to be in the Southern Baptist Convention and want to be here. However, I'll say this, for our church, and I would encourage other people to think about this, we're not going to use our cooperative program giving to try to make our votes more powerful than our votes. So FBC Farmersville gets 12 votes if we bring all our messengers to the SBC Annual Meeting. And I think that's fair, that our church gets a certain number of votes, other people's churches get a certain number of votes. And, if I'm coming to the annual meeting and I would agree enough to cooperate if I won this election or won this vote or did, whatever, got this one policy change made. But I find that when the votes are fairly counted, that I'm just not in the majority, okay? I think I need to accept from the Lord that my votes count for what they count for. And so the only way that I would look and say that I think it makes sense for a church to just stop giving through the cooperative program is if you come to the point that you look and say, we're just not Baptist anymore, or we're just at a point where we think that our votes are not fairly counted and we don't really, there's some kind of corruption in the system that's irretrievably gone. And, if that's the case, then probably one vote on one issue or one election for one office or whatever else is not the make or break on whether that's true. And so I think every church has the right to look and say, this isn't the right thing for us. And Southern Baptists, we lose churches every year and always have for a long time. We had churches that have gone independent Baptists. We had a stage in our life where, the churches of Christ, they were getting Southern Baptist churches every year who were defecting from Southern Baptist life and moving into Church Christ life. And I affirm the autonomy of our churches to do that. And we're going to have some of that happen. But the fact is, we also have new churches who come in every year because they see the beauty of what the cooperative program is and what our missions efforts are. And I just think that if we're not just really upset, and if we'll think carefully about the value of cooperative program missions and about how much we really do agree on, we agree on everything that we agreed on in 1998, And so we haven't walked back or drifted away from the things that we said we believed in 1998. And so if that was a good enough basis for cooperation for our church in 1998, why wouldn't we continue today and accomplish the good things that happened through the work of the cooperative program?
Yeah. We really appreciate your time. Thank you for giving us so much. We've covered a number of issues. I just wonder if there's anything else that you want to add or anything else you would want to speak to.
I'd just like to say I hope everybody will come to New Orleans, and it's necessary in an interview like this for us to talk about issues where there's difference of opinion. That's not going to be the nature of our meeting when we gather together. We're going to hug people's necks in the concourse, and we're going to see friends, and we're going to sing praise to Jesus, lift up our voices in unity with one another. And 99% of the votes that we cast are going to be nearly unanimous. And it's going to be a time when the Holy Spirit is going to come and move among us, and we're going to leave that place unified in our mission. Come be a part of that. And I think it'll encourage you about who we are as Southern Baptists and where we're going.
Well, thank you. Thank you for serving, and thank you for your time here with us on Baptist Press this week.
Thanks for the invitation. I'm always happy to visit with you, Brandon.
Thanks for joining us for Baptist Press this week, brought to you by the College at Southeastern. Do us a favor and stop by baptistpress.com and subscribe to one of our daily emails. We send them out in the morning and the afternoon. They come to you free in your inbox every day. Sign up right now at baptistpress.com.